If there is a player who personifies pure football, brilliant simplicity and absolute dedication to a single club, that player is Paul Scholes. A midfielder who made history at Manchester United, without needing marketing, without seeking the spotlight, but earning the respect of teammates, opponents and even legends of world football. Scholes' story begins in the city of Salford, in the heart of England, where he grew up with a ball at his feet and a vision of the game that no one could teach him. He was not the strongest, he was not the fastest, but he saw the game like few others, he saw spaces where no one else could, he distributed passes like a maestro and, when he had a chance, he unleashed those long-range shots that would make any goalkeeper tremble. But anyone who thinks Scholes was just a midfield artist is mistaken. He also knew how to be a fighter. His tackles were tough, often exaggerated, and he received many yellow and red cards throughout his career. Ferguson used to joke that Scholes was a genius with the ball at his feet, but a disaster without it. And this aggressiveness led to some historic clashes, especially against Patrick Vieira and Arsenal, in the hottest times of the Premier League. While the spotlight was on Beckham, Giggs, and even the newcomers Rooney and Cristiano Ronaldo, Scholes continued to be the heart of the team, working behind the scenes, without any stardom, without unnecessary interviews. And yet, he was admired by players like Zidane, Xavi and Iniesta, who always considered him one of the best midfielders they had ever seen play. But how did he rise to prominence at United? How did he earn a place in the team and become a key player for Alex Ferguson? This is a story that needs to be told. Paul Scholes arrived at Manchester United's first team in the mid-90s, in a generation that would change English football forever. Along with Beckham, Giggs, Neville and Butt, he was part of the legendary class of '92, young talents that Alex Ferguson launched to build an unbeatable team. But unlike his teammates, Scholes didn't have the charisma to grace magazine covers or land million-dollar advertising contracts. He just wanted to play football. In his early years, he had to fight for his place in a team full of stars. Experienced players dominated the midfield, and Ferguson saw Scholes as a key player for the future, but he knew he would have to groom him carefully. When he came on, he made the difference. Precise passes, tactical intelligence and, of course, that venomous shot from outside the box that was already becoming a trademark. The turning point came in 1997, when Roy Keane suffered an injury and Ferguson decided to give Scholes a regular start. And he didn't disappoint. His chemistry with Keane, Giggs and Beckham made United a dominant team in England and Europe. Scholes wasn't just a defensive midfielder, nor just an attacking midfielder. He was both at the same time. But while Manchester United were collecting titles, Scholes was also collecting cards. His tough tackles were the butt of jokes within the squad. Even Ferguson said that Scholes couldn't make a tackle without hitting an opponent. But the fans loved his feisty side. If he needed to come on strong to intimidate an opponent, he didn't hesitate. And it was this fighting spirit that made him one of the team's main players in the historic 1998-99 season, when Manchester United won the treble. But ironically, Scholes was left out of the Champions League final against Bayern Munich. A yellow card in the semi-final against Juventus ruled him out of the most important game in the club's history. And the pain of seeing his teammates win without him was something that left a deep impression on him. But Scholes was not one to complain. He used this frustration as motivation to grow even more at the club. And it was from there that he became one of Manchester United's most fundamental players in the following decade. His exclusion from the 1999 Champions League final would have shaken many players, but Paul Scholes was no ordinary player. Instead of complaining, he used it as fuel to become even more essential to Manchester United. Over time, his influence on the team grew. Whereas before he was just a luxurious supporting player, he was now a pillar of the midfield. At the turn of the millennium, while Beckham dominated the spotlight and Roy Keane led the team with his fierce leadership, Scholes continued to do what he did best: decide games with his passes and goals from outside the box. His style of play began to evolve. Whereas before he was more advanced, he now dropped back to start plays and dictate the team's tempo. United had a brain in midfield, and that brain was red. But don't think that made Scholes lose his competitiveness. If there was a fight on the pitch, he was there. And few players have given referees as much work as he has. Ferguson says Scholes had disastrous timing when it came to tackling, and opponents knew that a strong tackle from the number 18 was only a matter of time. Players like Vieira, Gerrard and even Xabi Alonso have felt the brunt of Scholes' tackles over the years. And speaking of great clashes, we can't forget the epic battles against Arsenal in the early 2000s. United and the Gunners were locked in historic duels for the Premier League title, and Scholes was always in the middle of the fight. Who doesn't remember the fights with Vieira and Keown? Or the game known as the Battle of the Buffet, when Arsenal players refused to accept defeat and a slice of pizza flew into Ferguson's face in the dressing room. But Scholes wasn't just about intensity and controversy. He was a genius with the ball. Players like Zidane, Xavi and Pirlo revered his talent. Xavi, one of the greatest midfielders in history, once said, "In all these years, the only player I've really envied is Scholes. He's the best midfielder of the last decade." The recognition was enormous, but Scholes remained averse to the spotlight. No social media, no unnecessary interviews, no sensationalist headlines. He was the anti-star in a team of stars. As the years went by, Paul Scholes continued to be a key player at Manchester United. Even with new stars arriving, he remained untouchable in midfield. Rooney, Ronaldo and Tevez shone in attack, but it was Scholes who made the team tick. And it was during this period that he starred in one of the most iconic moments of the Champions League. Semi-final against Barcelona, 2007-2008 season. The first leg at Camp Nou ended 0-0, and everything would be decided at Old Trafford. United needed a hero. And Scholes appeared. With a spectacular shot from outside the area, he scored the winning goal and put United in the Champions League final. The scene of the number 18 running to celebrate with open arms as Old Trafford exploded is one of the most memorable images in English football. And this time, unlike 1999, he would play in the final. Manchester United faced Chelsea in Moscow, and after a thrilling draw, won on penalties. Paul Scholes, finally, he was the European champion on the pitch. But time is no mercy to anyone. At over 30 years old, Scholes was beginning to feel the weight of intense seasons in the Premier League. Ferguson knew he would need to manage his minutes better, but Scholes, competitive as ever, did not like the idea of being left out. In 2011, the news that fans had been dreading came. Scholes announced his retirement. After almost 2 decades at the club, he felt it was time to call it quits. His farewell was discreet, as he always was. No big speeches, no grand farewell. Just a thank you and the certainty that he had left a huge legacy in English football. Paul Scholes' retirement in 2011 seemed final. But deep down, he still felt he could contribute on the pitch. And when Manchester United needed him, the maestro returned, without fanfare, without the spotlight, simply to do what he had always done, play football at the highest level. But before we get to that legendary return, it's worth remembering that, at the height of his career, Scholes was already regarded as one of the most respected players of his generation. He was not only a great passer, he had one of the most powerful and accurate shots in English football. How many goals from outside the box did he score? Countless. How many times did he decide matches with a clinical shot into the top corner? He was the kind of player who made the difficult seem simple. But Scholes was not just about talent. He was also an extremely competitive and controversial player. Despite his low profile off the pitch, on the pitch he did not shy away from a physical game. In fact, he was known for committing hard fouls and receiving yellow cards frequently. Scholes was that guy who, no matter how technical he was always late for tackles. Even Ferguson joked that he was one of the worst markers in the world. And speaking of controversies, who doesn't remember his historic feuds with Arsenal? During the 2000s, United and Arsenal were England's greatest rivals, and Scholes was not afraid to impose himself. He shoved Vieira, faced Henry and never wavered in a tight game. His fighting spirit was so great that the fans loved him even more for it. But back to his return. When Ferguson realized that United needed someone to command the midfield, Scholes agreed to return on one condition: no grand farewells, no emotional interviews. Just football. And he did it perfectly. At 37, he still played better than many young midfielders in the Premier League. Paul Scholes was back, and with him, Manchester United found their midfield solidity again. But there was something bigger going on behind the scenes. The 2012-13 season would not be a season I want. This would be Sir Alex Ferguson's last dance in charge of the club, and he wanted to go out on top. Scholes, even at 38, was still a key player. His accurate passing, his control of the pace of the game and his quiet leadership helped turn United into a winning machine. And this time, he had a special midfield partner in Michael Carrick, a player with a more understated style but who became essential alongside the legend. Together, they formed one of the most consistent duos in the Premier League that season. And with the arrival of Robin van Persie, United became an attacking powerhouse. Scholes, as always, adapted. He didn't run as much as before, but his reading of the game was sharp. He knew exactly where to be, who to pass to and how to keep possession under control. Even with fewer minutes on the pitch, his influence on the squad was enormous. United's run to the title had unforgettable moments. The 3-0 win over Aston Villa, which mathematically confirmed the Premier League trophy, was emblematic. Scholes was there, on the pitch, experiencing once again the feeling of being a champion. It was his 11th Premier League title. A simply absurd number. But he knew that this time it was for good. His body was no longer responding as it had before, and he wanted to leave at the right time, alongside Ferguson. In the last game of the season, Old Trafford paid tribute to both of them. A coach and a player who helped build a golden era at Manchester United. But Scholes was never one for emotional speeches or cinematic farewells. He left the pitch with the same discretion as always, without attracting attention, without the spotlight. His legacy, however, was already immortalized in the club's history. But the question remains, was Scholes underestimated? Would he have been even more recognized if he had played for another national team? Paul Scholes dominated the Premier League for over a decade, but when it came to the England national team, his story was very different. How could one of the greatest midfielders in the history of British football not shine as brightly while wearing the England shirt? The truth is that, since his debut in 1997, Scholes has never had a leading role in the national team. Not for lack of talent, but because of a problem that has been repeated for years: the insistence of coaches on fitting several stars into the same midfield, even if this was detrimental to the team. At first, he even had some good moments. In Euro 2000, for example, he scored 2 goals against Scotland and was one of the few players to save England's failure in the tournament. But as the years went by, Scholes was moved to the left side of midfield to make room for Gerrard and Lampard in the centre. This was the greatest injustice of England's golden generation. Instead of building a team around Scholes, the best passer of the time, they forced him to a trio that never worked perfectly. And this bothered the number 8. He didn't like his new position and felt that his importance within the team was diminishing. It was then that, in 2004, at just 29 years old, Scholes made a surprising decision. He announced his retirement from the national team. He still had plenty of fuel left in the tank, but he preferred to focus solely on Manchester United. For English fans, it was a shock. For Alex Ferguson, it was a blessing. The coach knew that this would prolong his maestro's career and help the club continue to dominate the Premier League. But what if Scholes had played for another national team? Many say that, if he had been Spanish, he would have been the great tiki-taka leader alongside Xavi and Iniesta. Others claim that, in Italy, he would have been a world-class regista, like Pirlo. The fact is that the football world respects Scholes much more than England itself did. Paul Scholes was a genius with the ball at his feet, but, incredibly, he never had the prominence he deserved in the English national team. At club level, especially at Manchester United, he was untouchable, one of the greatest midfielders of his generation. But when he wore the England shirt, he was treated as a supporting player. The problem? The famous English midfield dilemma. The national team had Gerrard and Lampard, 2 great players, but they never managed to play together effectively. The solution found by the coaches was to move Scholes to the left wing, a position that was not his specialty. For a player who stood out for his precise passing and long-range shots, being placed out of position was a hard blow. In 2004, at the age of 29, Scholes made a drastic decision. He retired from the national team. It was not a farewell due to a lack of talent or physicality, but rather out of frustration. He knew that as long as he continued to be placed in a position that was not his, he would never perform to his potential. Interestingly, years later, England realized their mistake. Before the 2010 World Cup, they tried to convince Scholes to return, but he refused. His mission was always with Manchester United, and there he was respected as he should have been. While in the Premier League he was revered as a maestro, in the national team his genius was wasted. Paul Scholes may not have received the recognition he deserved in the England national team, but in the world of football he was admired by legends of the sport. And we're not talking about just anyone. Players like Zidane, Xavi and Iniesta have all heaped praise on the Manchester United number 18. Zidane, one of the greatest midfielders in history, got straight to the point. Scholes is, without a doubt, one of the best players of his generation. Xavi, the brains behind Barcelona and the Spanish World Cup winners, went even further. At Manchester United you had Paul Scholes, a complete player. For me, he was one of the best midfielders I've ever seen play. Simply magnificent. But it wasn't just foreign stars who recognized his genius. Even his own teammates and Premier League rivals knew that Scholes was different. Thierry Henry once said he was the hardest player to play against, while Cristiano Ronaldo, who played alongside him at United, always praised his vision and intelligence. Interestingly, while journalists and fans often underestimated Scholes, the players who faced or played with him knew exactly how good he was. Perhaps the fact that he was so discreet off the pitch made his legend less celebrated than it should have been. But on the pitch, for those who really understood football, Scholes was a cut above most. If Paul Scholes was silent and lethal on the pitch, off it, after retiring, he decided to let his tongue run wild. As a commentator, he was not afraid to criticize former teammates, coaches and, above all, the Manchester United board. Scholes was always an outspoken guy, and this sincerity often led to controversy. He harshly criticized the team's performance after Ferguson's departure, saying that United had lost its identity. He has taken swipes at coaches such as Jose Mourinho and Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, saying that the team played without ambition. Not even players escaped. He once said that Paul Pogba was inconsistent and that United's forwards didn't know how to finish properly. But if there's one thing Scholes has never lost, it's the respect of his fans. Despite his harsh opinions, he has always shown love for the club, and many fans agree with his criticisms. Unlike other former players who are concerned about maintaining good relations, Scholes prefers to tell the truth, no matter who it hurts. And so ends the story of one of the greatest midfielders in the Premier League. A player who didn't need the spotlight to be a giant, who won everything with Manchester United and who is still a reference for the greatest stars in world football. If you've made it this far, thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss the next videos. And if you like incredible football stories, I recommend watching the previous video, where we talk about the legendary battles between Scholes and Patrick Vieira in the epic duels between Manchester United and Arsenal. It's a must-watch. Thanks to everyone and we'll see you in the next video.